Mel, I remember when Daniel Jones was drafted number 6 by the Giants. There have been very few picks in recent memory that sort of took over the conversation the following morning quite the way that one did. So now he's been benched. The Giants are going in a new direction. And Field, I'll actually send the first question in your direction. Regardless of where the Giants fall in the draft order, should we assume they're going to take a quarterback?
Yes. Because I think the only viable veteran quarterback option this offseason that I know as of right now is scheduled to be a free agent is Sam Darnold. And I just don't think Sam Darnold's going to want to go back to New York, Grady, having already lived in that bubble. And frankly, at times really struggle with the surroundings that do come with New York, as you know better than anybody. It is a market that is different and unlike any other in the entire NFL landscape. I think Sam has enjoyed the sort of peace and quiet that has come with playing in a market more like Minnesota as opposed to New York. So yes, the Giants are going to be in the quarterback market in the draft. And while it is not a great draft class for quarterbacks, we know this is going to happen every single year. A few of them are going to rise into the top. I have that bet with Mel, 3 quarterbacks in the top 10. Can't tell you it's a slam dunk, but it's feeling pretty good right now because there are several teams that are scheduled to pick inside the top 10 as of this moment that I do not think will win enough games to get outside of the top 10 that are so desperate for a quarterback that we are going to see an earlier run on quarterbacks that our grades and our overall rankings would suggest.
I want to see who that third quarterback is, Field.
Jalen Milroe.
What if he goes back to Alabama, which he should?
All right, then we'll have to have a different conversation.
All right, well, right, because I think Milroe and Nussmeier should go back. But yep. I think to the point about the quarterback position, you say, okay, what is this team going to do? The New York Giants. What is Tennessee going to do? What is the Raiders? What are the Raiders going to do?
Take a quarterback.
All these teams that are looking at quarterbacks, if you say Shedeur is the number 1 guy and he's going to go number 1 in the draft, Jacksonville's got the number 1 pick. They're going to trade down. Who's going to move up to get Shedeur? Is Cam Ward going to be in that mix to be a top 10 pick? Probably forced up like Shedeur will be as well. So I don't know who's going to get these quarterbacks, and somebody's going to be left out. And you say Sam Darnold, where does he end up? Who knows? The Jets had Sam Darnold. They drafted Zach Wilson. How'd that work out? Bottom line is I don't think we know right now if you don't get one of these 2 quarterbacks and those other 2 go back. And like you said, there's not much out there in terms of veterans that you can pull in outside of Sam. Where do you go? Then do you start overdrafting even more so when you get into that second round, which we haven't seen a lot of. We've seen first rounders, and there's a big drop off, even though, like say, Levis went in the second round when he was projected to be a 1. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the teams that get shut out of Shedeur and Cam Ward, assuming Milroe goes back and Nussmeier goes back, what the heck do they do? Where do they go? Quarterbacks don't grow on trees. There's just not that many out there. Joe Flacco was coming in at age 40. And almost saved the Browns season, was supposed to save the Colts season. That didn't work out. Then they would go back to Richardson, and he beats the Jets, who were supposed to have the 85 Bears defense, and didn't have it. So at the end of the day, where do we go? And I'm going to see, it's going to be really fun to see that rush to the top because the Raiders got really screwed over last year with 13 when 6 quarterbacks went. They were sitting there saying, what the hell happened? What the hell happened? Is this a nightmare? This is nightmare on whatever street, right? So at the end of the day, Field, I got to believe with Brady's influence in the Shedeur Sanders situation that I don't see a way where the Raiders don't do something aggressively to go up and get that pick and take Shedeur Sanders.
To be clear, Mel, it's called the Nightmare on the Strip out there in Vegas. That's what they call last year's draft. Although they did get Brock Bowers, who might be the offensive rookie of the year, at least for the first 12 weeks of the season. So not exactly a consolation prize there in Vegas. But Greeny, it's exactly the point that I want to continue to reiterate, is that as Mel noted, teams like last year's Las Vegas Raiders got shut out of the quarterback derby. What's the best way to ensure that you don't get shut out of the quarterback derby? You take one a little bit earlier than you probably should, because having one, even at a more premium cost, is better than not having one at all. And as of Thursday, November 21st, the time of this conversation, I do fully expect, based off what I've heard, Garrett Nussmeier to head back to LSU for one more year. Jalen Milroe, I do think has a chance to come out. That's why I'm going to continue to hold my ground on Milroe as QB3 in this year's class.
Now, as I mention every week, we take your questions on Twitter, X, and your comments and everything else using the hashtag #FirstDraft, or frequently you could just reply to the posts that Field and I put up over the course of the week. I just want to shout out JWI Science Guy who tweeted, "What do the Giants do when Tommy Cutlets wins them 3 or 4 games down the stretch and they play their way out of a top 5 pick?" Which I guess stranger things have happened than that. But does this feel like it's setting up for a trade? To the point that you made, Mel, we're talking about how, do any of these quarterbacks really belong at number 1? Do all of them belong in the top 10? The reality is that my prediction, and you and I have our own bet on this, is there's going to be a mad dash for number 1, and someone is trading up there, whether it's the Raiders, whether it's the Giants, whether it's someone else we don't see coming, trading up to number 1 to take Shedeur.
Well, I'm paying you right now, Greeny. I got it. We'll transfer the money over to you today.
Where's my
I don't know
money?
how we do that. We'll just make that happen. Shedeur's going number 1, barring a collapse of. I mean, the bottom line is, right now there are a limited number of quarterbacks for this draft that are worthy of being first rounders. I think Milroe should go back. Nussmeier definitely go back. Okay, then you have 2. So where do you go if you're multiple teams? We talked about that. But in terms of Shedeur, I think Shedeur, who I think when you draw, and I hate comps, and you guys know that, but I did last year throw out the Bo Nix, Drew Brees comp to make it for Sean Payton a nice pick. I did that 2 months before the draft. I'll do it right now. I will say Shedeur will remind people a little bit of Joe Burrow, little Jared Goff, little Tom Brady. And I say that with Brady coming out of Michigan, not what he became the greatest of all time, but coming out. What did you see? Pocket awareness, okay? Pocket instincts, accuracy, throwing the ball, incredible toughness, taking so many hits at Colorado. It's amazing he's still standing today. So when you put it all in mind, the great mind for the game, unflappable, like I say, all those things can be. He's not going to run a great 40. He may never run a 40. If I'm sure, I'm never going to run a 40. So he can still on 3rd and 8, like Burrow, get you that first down. And that's, I think, where Shedeur will draw comparisons in some way. There's elements of all 3 that he possesses. Will he be any of that? Who knows? But that's why to Greeny, that's why Greeny's getting richer because of me. That's why, number 1 pick overall right now, some way, somehow, is going to be Shedeur Sanders.
Now, Greeny, didn't we just talk last week about how we got to retire generational from the lexicon of football fans and analysts and everybody else in between? I'm retiring comps in which a guy has the comps of the best quarterback to ever play the game, arguably the best quarterback in the league in terms of pure play this year, and Joe Burrow, and then a guy who just, at last time I checked, has the Lions at 9-1 and Jared Goff.
Is that young Fielding taking a shot at me? Is that
that's right now? That's correct.
I said elements of those 3.
Yeah,
I
sure.
said elements.
Yeah.
Then I say elements. Yeah. I said
you did say elements.
They're not going to be those guys. Just little elements, and that all 3 kind of little Shedeur in those guys is all I said, Field. So I agree. It sounds like it's a dramatic overstatement, and it's not. It's just little elements is what I think people will see, just like they saw a little bit of Drew Brees. I think Sean Payton did in Bo Nix. I think he's going to be the next Drew Brees, but there were some things that Brees possessed that Bo Nix did, and that's why I brought it up. And I think the same thing here is why we're talking about the number 1 pick in the draft. There's got to be a reason to take a guy number 1. Shedeur has to have something to be the number 1 pick, right? He's got to have something. Burrow went number 1. Goff went number 1. Brady was basically Mr. Irrelevant because the Patriots took a corner from Virginia over Brady in the 6th round. He became a compensatory pick. So let's just call him Mr. Irrelevant, because for New England, they could have had him in the 6th and even taken there to a comp pick. So you got the Brady who slid through to end of the 6th round. You got 2 number 1 picks overall, and Shedeur is going to be the number 1 pick overall more than likely. So there's got to be something, some pieces, some elements that allow him or make him that number 1 pick overall.
I'm just not sure on that still, by the way. I don't know that Shedeur, I don't feel as confident as of right now that Shedeur is the number 1 overall pick.
I do, and that's why I'm going to win.
Who do you think it is right now?
Yeah, who would it be?
It could be Cam Ward, or it could be I just don't know. And maybe I'm so wrong here, but let's just say the team that finished with the number 1 pick is one of Jacksonville or New England. Teams that don't need quarterbacks going forward, but do have a puncher's chance at being the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Are they willing to move down a few spots only, or maybe more accurately, is somebody willing to pay the freight to get up from 3 or 4 to 1 to guarantee their choice of quarterback? Or will they say, hey, and I'm just going to throw a random team out there. Will Vegas say, hey, we can move to number one at the cost of this year's first plus next year's first and maybe something else. Or maybe we just hope that the Patriots just stand pat or the Jaguars just stand pat at number one, and the team behind us also does not need a quarterback, and somebody else is totally enamored by Travis Hunter, and they say Travis is a better grade than either of the quarterbacks, so we're taking him, and we'll just let one of these two quarterbacks fall into our lap at pick number 4. I don't think it is as obvious of a decision as I think it was for the Giants and other teams to explore moving up last year.
I thoroughly disagree. What do I know?
Good.
You guys are the experts.
No,
I think if you're the Raiders and you just, as Mel said, you just had this nightmarish scenario befall you last year and you didn't get the guy you wanted, I'm getting the guy that I want. I'm not taking any chance on that happening again. And then Field, to your point, if you're the Patriots, you want the Patriots to take Kelvin Banks anyway. Well, you slide back a couple of picks and you get the guy that you really need in the first place.
Yes. And by the way, as much as I am a Kelvin Banks fan, I do think that a more appropriate spot for him to be drafted would be something like, 6 to 8 or 4 to 8, somewhere in that range, as opposed to number 1 overall. Mel always says, you got to be Jonathan Ogden or Orlando Pace as a left tackle to go number 1 overall. He's got a good grade in my book. It's not a, likely Hall of Fame grade, which is where those guys, of course, have both wound up. So it would make sense for a team like them who could afford to move back and pick up some draft capital and still get the player that they target. This draft just feels like a much more complicated and tangled web compared to last year's at the very top.